Hello, this is Sarah, and this is another episode, How to Deal with the IRS and a Tax Audit. You know, the IRS is considered public enemy number one for many, many years. They have been very abusive to the population. And so a number of years ago, in November of 1988, it had been so bad that the Congress enacted a Bill of Rights and signed it into law. It had gotten that bad. They ran amok on their powers and what they were allowed to do and what they weren't. However, they would not have been able to do that to anyone that wasn't actually prepared. And I mean by being prepared, they knew their own laws. They knew the tax laws. They knew how the IRS operated. And to know how they operate is actually not all that difficult. You know, we as public citizens, we just get to be lazy and arrogant about, well, they should tell us what to do on every step. No, it is our responsibility, first of all, to know the law and to comply with that law. And there's nothing in the government says that they are responsible for spoon feeding you and to make sure that you understand everything. It's your responsibility. See, a person with knowledge of the law and his rights is presumed that he is in a position to stand up for those rights. You know, if a citizen is ignorant of the legal limitations of that government or that system, which is the IRS in this case, it might as well not even exist, because if we don't know them, they don't exist. See, ignorant citizens remain entirely at the mercy of their own government. Only educated citizens, willing and able to take actions, are capable of preventing government abuse. So it's up to us as citizens to know not everything, not all the 8,000 or 50,000 pages of the IRS code or all the other rules and regulations in the country, but we should know enough about where to find it, what makes sense, and just don't go through life like, you know, somebody's going to spoon feed you when you need it. See, really, the courts belong to the people, because at the foundation of the Bill of Rights is the right to hold our government accountable for its unlawful transgressions. But if you don't know what the transgressions, and if they're transgressions, then how would you know anything was happening? See, the IRS is just like an army in the time of war, except it exists all the time. However, no commander with any degree of intelligence or experience will attack when his adversary is prepared and capable of doing battle. It really is not as difficult as it may seem to deal with the IRS. Now, even as uninformed as I was when I first had an encounter with the IRS, it seemed, very overwhelming and intimidating. I was able to do it as a person who was not very informed, but I made it my job to get informed, and so that's the reason why I have so much information on how to deal with the IRS right now. Now, first of all, an easy way to start to figure out any kind of government, any kind of institution, any kind of corporation. The IRS is just like a big corporation. It has a hierarchy of order, and whether that is whether you're talking about there's a part for individuals and there's part for business, and then another category have to do with charities and nonprofits and tax professionals, and then there's one part that has to do with the collecting taxes, all things having to do with tax audits, getting more money other than just the tax coming in. And that division is broken down into 4 major subdivisions, and those divisions are the examination division, and that division is responsible to conduct audits. They're not responsible for collecting money. They are not responsible for telling you that you have so much penalty, because that's not their job. The next division, division number 2, is the appeals division, and that is if you have an examination or an audit, it's an audit, and then you disagree, then you can have an appeals, and that's the appeals division. You don't go to the examination division and ask for an appeal. That's another category. That's another department, and sometimes they don't even talk to each other, so they just hand paper from one to the other. So if you say, well, the auditor said this, the auditor said that, if it is actually not in the paper, it's not so. Now, the division number 3 is the collections division. Now, that division is responsible for collecting taxes that is owed, unpaid taxes or penalties and that sort of thing. That's what they're responsible for. Then the 4th division is the division of criminal investigation division, responsible to investigate and aid in the prosecution of criminal violations of tax laws. Now, that doesn't apply to you and anybody who would be listening to this. It's unlikely that you'd be in any criminal intent or anything. So generally, the criminal division doesn't apply. If you're being audited and the auditor says you're going to go to jail, well, they don't have anything to do with you going to jail, because you only go to jail when you get into the criminal division. And the possibility of going to jail because of a problem with the IRS is like 1%, 1/250th of 1%. You could be struck by lightning 10 times before you'd ever be audited or go to jail by the IRS, not be audited. Because in fact, every single person and every single form that goes into the IRS is audited, even though most of them are audited by machine. And they're all audited by machine until they're kicked out, periodically kicked out, meaning they're going to audit this one because something they have a question about. So just because you haven't had a face-to-face audit by the IRS doesn't mean that you haven't been audited, because every single person who sends in a form has been audited by the IRS. Back to these divisions. It's sort of like if you went to apply for a job. Now, you would not go to the president's office in a corporation to apply for a job. You would go to the personnel office to apply for the job. Now, the personnel office doesn't decide how much you're going to get paid. However, they do have from the Treasury Department a list of how they can get paid, what they can pay people who they hire, because they have categories of people. So when you understand that one division, especially in the government, one division doesn't talk to the others. They hand papers back and forth, but they don't talk to each other. So it is possible in a corporation that the personnel person will go over here to the finance department and say, can I make an exception and give this person a higher rate of more money or something, or get something solved. But the IRS, they don't audit. They don't work that way. The next thing about the IRS is that they have an internal revenue manual. Now, if you worked in a corporation, you have terms of service, what your job description, what you're expected to do, the rules of the company. Well, the Internal Revenue Manual is not openly discussed too much, especially in the public. However, it is a little bit difficult to get a hold of, but it is more available now than it was, say, 20 years ago. And see, all or part of the Internal Revenue Manual is available from the IRS Disclosure Office, which is located in every IRS district. So you can really find out, if you want to go to that much detail, and find out the exact job description of the auditor. Now, the next time, you can also get entire copies of this IRS manual if you want to. You may have to pay for it, but you can still get it. See, if you ever expect to have a confrontation with anyone, whether it's the IRS or whether it is a corporation, it is the best idea to find out all there is you can know about that corporation. Now, if I was going to have a lawsuit against, say, ABC Company because I thought they gave me faulty products, or they cheated me out of something, I would actually go and find out about that company. I would go online and see who their officers were and what their policies were and all that. Well, you should do the same when you are going to confront the IRS. So it's just like in any anticipated confrontation, the intelligent commander would acquire the enemy's battle plan. And this battle plan has their strategies. Well, in the tax manual, the Internal Revenue Manual is what I'm talking about, they have every single thing that they do and the process for everything. The government is very detailed in all of its policies, employee policies, description of jobs, this and that, and the line of command, like the military. You have to cross the T and dot the I's before you can do the next thing. Well, the IRS is the same. So, and it's all written there. You can find that out. Well, can they really do this to me? Or and what do I have to do next? Some of this can be long and very laborious, but it can be very well worth it. Now, if you don't do it yourself, you're going to have to pay somebody high money, a lot of bucks. And on top of that, they don't do nearly the investigation that you would do, or as good. So don't expect somebody, even if you pay them. It's like inspecting your CPA to know everything about your life when they fill out your taxes. Well, they don't. A CPA's duty is to fill in the box. You give him the numbers, he puts them in the right boxes. He you are not paying a CPA to think for you. He will give you some general and broad things about what you can do, but that's not what the CPAs do. The typical audit involves one auditor. The average appeal involves one appeal officer. And then there's a garden variety of tax court cases that occupies a time of one district attorney, counsel attorney, and then there's one attorney from the Justice Department. See, the thing is that you feel like you're going against a total IRS when you get audited, but in fact, the IRS is the feeling when it's overwhelmingly outnumbered. But you're really dealing with one person at a time, and if you understand what that person is, that person's job description, and when they end their job description and it goes to the next person, then you need to know that. See, this results in a well-planned strategy. It is like road markers. You got to 1, you got to 2, you got to 20, you got to 100. The IRS has anyone convinced to the contrary to their whole strategy is psychological warfare, because they just want to intimidate you, say, I can't win. Well, you're winning one at a time. It's just like when you make money or when you sell. Suppose you're selling pots and pans, like the old Stanley guys used to do. They sold one set at a time. You sell to one customer at a time, not to masses. See, they have made an appearance of overwhelming numbers, and that there's no way for you to fight. But in fact, there really is, because they have a very carefully established, unbroken chain of command. This feature contributes to the illusion of overwhelming forces, but in fact, they're not, because they don't all think alike. Each person is a person who works for the IRS. They all have exact things they're supposed to go by. See, first, the officers in the field have very little authority to act independently of their established procedure. See, the IRS is locked into its manual and can be expected to follow these procedures exactly. And when they get off track, you know it. You can know it. If you don't, you can't call them on it. See, this factor can be exploited by striking quickly, creating confusion within the enemy camp. And you have, of course, the enemy is the IRS. And one of the things that when I was being audited, the auditor said they weren't going to they weren't going to accept one of my deductions. They weren't going to allow me that deduction because they didn't appreciate, or they didn't like my particular, they didn't like my receipt. They said it wasn't adequate. And I said, that's adequate because that's what it says in law. And let me just tell you one. Your boss, the IRS, likes you less than they like me. So if you don't just get on with it and finish this audit, I'll just complain to your boss that you're being uncooperative and not accepting what your policy says. And of course, the guy got it. See, and I wasn't a wizard when I went through that particular audit. I wasn't a wizard in taxes, I'm telling you. But I knew that little much. I knew enough about what they were allowed to do and what they weren't. See, the IRS can be expected to maneuver within the context of the manual. I keep talking about the manual. Foreknowledge of the provisions of the manual enable you to anticipate their every move. Now, that's our first, this is our first session on how to deal with the enemy, IRS auditors, IRS confrontation. So that'll be all for now. Thanks. Goodbye now.